and followed the government's orders without question. Briefly examine the three main groups operating during the Vietnam War. 1. There were, without question, many subversives who were working against American soldiers stationed overseas. They wanted the mental illness of communism to spread all over the world. They despised America's attempts to help prevent the spread of communism. The subversives were the ones pitying what happened to the evil communists operating in Hanoi. These people would not enlist and, when drafted, would not serve. If they were forced to participate, they would get out with some type of excuse. This was the group who said good riddance when American soldiers died. They would lie about the war just to make America look bad. When the war was finally over, this group contained the dregs of society who spat on the returning soldiers. Oftentimes, members of this group would attempt to masquerade as the second group, disguising their true intentions. 2. There were many decent, concerned citizens who were against the war. Understandably, some felt that, although it was honorable for the government to stop the spread of communism, it was not the United States' job to act as the world's policeman. These people felt that America should focus on problems here in our nation, rather than problems half a world away. Many of these people were against the government sacrificing America's children for the benefit of Vietnam. Generally speaking, this group was not involved in the protests. These people would not enlist, but when they were asked to serve, they would go, but with serious reservations. 3. Some people believed that whatever our government did, it was right. The people in this group may have opposed the war acts initially, but once the war was in full force and people were being drafted, they had to support the war. Many of these people enlisted. Others in this group served, with little hesitation, when drafted. They would rather die than risk their honor, or appear to be sympathetic to the evil people in the first group. They were this nation's warriors, those patriots who are always ready to fight on the behalf of America's actions. In 1965, amid controversies surrounding Vietnam, Martin Luther King Jr. was at the forefront of those opposing the war. There is no question that he belonged to the first group, those who were sympathetic to the communists in North Vietnam, the Viet Cong. Under the pretense of pacifism and nonviolence, he said that he opposed the war. However, his allegiance with Hanoi and its communist leadership were something that he had difficulty explaining to those who could see through his smokescreen. King revealed his plans in a discussion with the black militant Stokely Carmichael. King told Carmichael that he wanted to help our Viet Cong comrades in arms by disrupting American cities. Roland Evans and Robert Novak, both of whom were prominent newspaper columnists at the time, noticed King associating with Carmichael of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. Evans and Novak were quick to point out that King had surrendered valuable ground to leftist extremists in their drive for control of the civil rights movement. Also, they said, unless King breaks with the SNCC extremists, liberal whites may no longer follow his leadership. They were right. Some of King's followers, most of whom belonged to the first or second group, followed King's lead. Senator Strom Thurmond stated his displeasure with King's attempts to influence people in international affairs. Senator Thurmond felt that King had no right to engage in international affairs. Senator Thurmond described King's activities. A whole new sphere of troublemaking for the United States was launched yesterday when Martin Luther King Jr., accompanied by Bayard Rustin, turned from his successes at creating domestic disorders to an attempt to play the same role with similar consequence in international affairs. Neither King nor Rustin have backgrounds or experiences which would entitle them to an official audience. King is a notorious troublemaker and intermeddler, who has of late publicly revealed his interest in international affairs. Only King, and possibly some agencies of the government, can be sure what qualifications he possesses, or thinks he possesses, which would make persuasive his proposals to the leaders of communism to whom he proposes next to address. King said that, if America were to take further steps against the communists in Vietnam, it may be necessary to engage in civil disobedience. Instead of protesting the bloodshed and tyranny perpetrated by the Viet Cong, he condemned America, the very nation that was trying to bring justice and equality to Vietnam. Evidently, King's wife, Coretta Scott King, must have felt the same way. She accompanied a delegation of women to Hanoi. the late black Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall lambasted King for his anti-Vietnam tactics. "If King is trying to line the civil rights struggle with Vietnam," said Marshall, "he is leading the movement in the wrong direction. I do not believe he speaks for the majority of civil rights leaders or the majority of Negroes." It is quite amusing to read King's rantings about communism. Although he often tried to make it sound as if he denounced communism, he fully supported it. Since he often advocated the support of communism, his strategy of denouncing it verbally, when in front of a public audience, but supporting it physically worked brilliantly. That is why communist groups always supported him. In one speech, he actually condemned communism, possibly with the hope that it would vindicate him from any wrongdoing. Further, by delivering a speech filled with such double talk, he ostensibly gave loyal Americans who would not tolerate his activities, if they knew what his hidden agenda truly was, the feeling that he was also loyal and merely misunderstood. In one speech, King promulgated, "We must not call everyone a communist or an appeaser who advocates the seating of Red China in the United Nations and who recognizes that hate and hysteria are not the final answers to the problem of these turbulent days. We must not engage in a negative anti-communism, but, rather, in a positive thrust for democracy, realizing that our greatest defense against communism is to take action in behalf of justice. We must, with positive action, seek to remove those conditions of poverty, insecurity, and injustice which are the fertile soil in which communism grows and develops." King was absolving himself from his actions. King openly supported Red China's admission to the UN. That is why he did not want people calling everyone a communist or an appeaser who advocates the seating of Red China in the United Nations. And anyone that disagreed with him was simply full of hate and hysteria, not sound reasoning, King claimed. King said that Americans should not engage in a negative anti-communism, although the wording is basically a double negative, similar to that of a child saying, "I don't want no food." His message is quite apparent. People should not criticize communists. Much like a fox running through a stream to rid itself of its scent, so that the hound dogs would not catch it, King was hoping to befuddle his enemies, non-communists, non-militants, and non-activists. In other words, people who work for a living, and enlist their aid. Contrary to King's thesis, America was engaging in a positive thrust for democracy. It was King who wanted the communist government in Vietnam left alone, and in America, he wanted his own brand of positive action to be administered to end the disparities in our nation, namely, more government intervention to be administered at his discretion. As King continued his speech, out of the same breath, he stated, "These are revolutionary times. All over the globe, men are revolting against old systems of exploitation and oppression, and out of the wombs of a frail world new systems of justice and equality are being born. We in the West must support these revolutions. It is a sad fact that, because of comfort, complacency, a morbid fear of communism, and our proneness to injustice, the Western nations, that initiated so much of the revolutionary spirit of the modern world, have now become the arch-anti-revolutionaries." King constantly complained that both he and his cohorts were exploited and oppressed. Was he trying to get something across, perhaps a threat to American culture, when he suggested that men are revolting against old systems of exploitation and oppression? It is amusing how he stated, "We in the West." Earlier in his diatribe, King stated that America fell victim to the deadly Western arrogance that has poisoned the international atmosphere for so long. Ironically, several paragraphs later in his speech, he felt that he was part of this same deadly Western arrogance. If there was ever any doubt about King's true allegiances, it is revealed by one of his own sentences. We in the West must support these revolutions. King never cared for the American soldiers dying in Vietnam. He only cared for the Viet Cong's revolution. In King's speech, he said that America should not fear communism. But why should not Americans have a morbid fear of communism? Communism was responsible for countless millions of deaths under the dictatorship of Stalin, Mao Zedong, and other such disgusting characters. As for him accusing Americans of being the arch-anti-revolutionaries, Americans were hardly that. The purpose of the intervention was to help the Vietnamese residing in the southern part so that they would not have to bear the evils associated with the dictatorship of communism. King's speech inflamed all the patriotic organizations across the U.S. Malcolm Tarlov, who was the national